first time. Brian, what's that building over there? Someone asked from behind me. I glanced in my rear view, then out the window where my passenger was pointing. I keyed the radio receiver in my right hand, the kind that truck drivers use, and my voice blasted from the speaker under my seat. That's the Library of Congress. But isn't that in D.C.? I swerved and cursed as my 15-passenger van went around a double-parked cab. Then I said, that's the other Library of Congress. They built this one in case of a nuclear attack. And an obvious lie, obviously, right? The trick was to keep them wondering whether you honestly didn't know or were just cracking a joke. I turned halfway and grinned toward the back of the van. I mean, what if all the books blew up? A little over a year before this, I had graduated from college. I quit the only career-oriented job I'd had, working for the Daily Wildcat, in order to study abroad and obsess about global poverty. Then a classmate at the time, a guy in his mid-30s, who was from Minneapolis, but said that his soul was from St. Croix, asked if I'd like to guide adventure tours in Mexico. Naturally, after graduating, I signed up with Adventure USA, not the real name, and went through a 3-week training with a handful of other budding guides, learning logistics for leading budget road trips with up to 13 passengers. One of the things not covered in training, because it was assumed that if you could make it to the training in Los Angeles, you could figure out on your own that all guides should have a cell phone and a credit card. I didn't believe in either of these. So that's great. So I made every single phone call from the road, long distance, with a sack of quarters. It's true. Instead of plastic, I used traveler's checks. $3,000 worth for just an average trip. And I hid them under a spare tire. After training, I got the keys to a gleaming white 10-cylinder Ford Econoline, complete with a luggage rack that doubled as a sleeping bunk. Guides did not just start out going to Mexico, I learned. Funny thing that. That came with time, typically in a guide's second or third season. So I started leading trips around the western U.S., an area that I already knew pretty well from growing up in Arizona. My first 2 trips were about an A- or a B+, based on the feedback I got from the company webpage. And for my third, I landed a cross-country Northern Adventure tour. That was a pretty quick step up from what I'd seen so far, and I felt like I had just made partner. I was on my way to bigger things. Back-to-back cross-country trips, the 42-day grand tour, and of course, Mexico. My passengers on this trip were mostly au pairs who were still below the legal drinking age. I know. They were finishing their terms in the U.S. and looking forward to this trip across the country before heading back home, mainly somewhere in Europe. We started up the coast, checked out the elephant seals by Hearst Castle, and then Big Sur, before arriving in San Francisco. After showing them the second Library of Congress, I took them to Amoeba Music, since music is the glue of most good road trips. We all know this. My radio receiver had pulled double duty as karaoke mic more than a dozen times during previous tours. Viva Las Vegas was a big hit. This group went in, rummaged a bit, came out, ready to hit the road. All right, I said, onward. What do we got on deck? The woman in the front seat, I think her name was Sharon, unwrapped a CD and slid it into the little slot in the center of the dashboard. She turned and smiled at 2 friends, Vicky and Haley, I think, and all 3 nodded in unison. So tell me what you want, what you really, really want. Oh, man. I thought. Everyone else in the van threw up their hands like they'd just been taken to church. I wanna really, really, really never hear the song again. So this 3-week-long trip went to northern Idaho, Jackson Hole, and Yellowstone. After crossing the Continental Divide, it goes eastward to Chicago, and then it finished in New York. The basic formula was about the same as what I'd done before. Spent a few nights camping and then a couple of nights in a city. There were a couple of added challenges, however. Most importantly, I didn't know the area like I did the Southwest. And also the weather was starting to turn now that it was October. That meant that we were in for a few really cold nights up north. So we dropped our gear at the KOA, an hour outside of Jackson Hole, and drove into town, where I made a serious rookie mistake. In my mind, I could see the little black bag on the picnic table back in camp a full hour away. In that bag were the traveler's checks and all of our money for gas, food, and lodging for the entire trip. You guys go have fun. I got some tours to take care of. I said dropping my crew downtown in Jackson Hole. At this point, I'm checking my watch. I'm imagining bandits and bears fanning themselves with my stack of good as cash traveler's checks and seriously wishing that I had a credit card. Unfortunately, downtown Jackson Hole is not fun at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday unless you're into day drinking shopping at Walmart. Several hours later, when I picked everyone up, the Spice Girls gave me a look so cold it could have frosted my windshield. Again, the credit card. Brian, there was absolutely nothing to do, they said. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I want to start over and put this train back on track. So sitting around our campsite in Yellowstone, I had the chance to do just that. Sharon, feeling saucy, I guess, announced that she could eat a dozen donuts in 10 minutes and threw down the gauntlet. If she succeeded, I had to run around the very large, very full campground in a thong. If she lost, she would run the same circuit with an American flag around her neck, squawking like a chicken. No thong. I saw the thong, and I did not want any part of it. It's not that I wouldn't fly my freak flag in rural Montana. A couple of weeks before, I went bungee jumping for the first time at Circus Circus. But I needed to work up to it. Instead, I felt like someone had just woken me up from a nap. Anyway, I said okay, but when she shoved half a dozen donuts into her mouth with 10 seconds left, I started feeling like the game was kind of rigged. Boom, she said, through donut-stuffed cheeks, arms raised in triumph, and then she pointed at me. Shake your wee-wee. No way, I shot back. You didn't even eat them. I crossed my arms like a petulant child. I think I skipped a cue. She protested, gulping donuts and shaking her fist. The other two girls rallied to her defense. Then I crossed my arms like a petulant child and said, I'd go if she did, but by then everyone was walking away. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I want a really, 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 really sick cigar! So, trip was only half over. We went to the Devil's Tower next and watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind on an outdoor screen with the tower in the distance. They didn't like it. No, they didn't like it. The Badlands were, well, bad. Mount Rushmore was just okay. There are giant faces carved into a mountain. I felt the trip slipping out of my control. And Mexico, it seemed, was getting farther and farther away. When is the fun, Brian, coming back? They asked me, and I honestly didn't know the answer. Somewhere before hitting Chicago, grasping at straws, I made a promise. I told them I would take them to see the coolest roller coaster park in the world, which had the coolest brand new roller coaster, the Top Thrill Dragster. I explained, it's an accelerator coaster that goes from 0 to like a zillion miles per hour in a matter of seconds and then loops the rider backward 420 feet in the air. It's a modern marvel, I told them. So, getting to Cedar Point requires a speedy departure from Chicago, which we did not get. That put us into the amusement park with only 3 hours to spare before closing. Not ideal, but still salvageable. I talked up the dragster a bit more and suggested that we ride it as a group, make it the last ride of the day. The group split up, agreeing to meet an hour before the park closed at the dragster line. Spice Girls went off on their own, and the rest of us got on a couple of rides, enjoying the finest in Midwestern American entertainment. But then I realized I was still on Central Time. For all you kids out there on a cross-country tour with no smartphone, you have to adjust your watch every time you cross a time zone, or you end up thinking that it's an hour earlier than it actually is. Crossing from Chicago into Ohio put us on Eastern time, which meant that my tour group had 1 hour before the park closed, not 2. We had to ride the Top Thrill dragster immediately. I will never forget feeling the terror, the sickening rot of a bubble inflaming my gut, the blood pounding in my ears, and a sudden numb weightlessness, and then thinking, wow, they sure look pissed. A backward somersault at 400 feet is nothing compared to the look I got as the Spice Girls walked up, realizing that we had just gotten off the ride. I passed it off as a hiccup. Couldn't be helped. Sorry, guys, the park closed early. I'm not sure what happened. Yeah. So then, the ride back to camp was dead quiet. And I don't remember exactly when my lie caught up to me, but I do remember that as soon as I said it, that I knew my fate was sealed. It was another passenger, I believe, who finally told Sharon to make sure that she set her watch forward now that we were on the East Coast. Back at camp, the 3 Spice Girls stormed up to me and said, "You forgot to wind your watch, didn't you? That's why we missed the ride." A true master of the lie might have wiggled out of that one, but all I could muster was, "Yep." God, absolutely typical, they said, storming off the way they came. I tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I just want to go home. My journey was over before I returned, writes Steinbeck in Travels with Charlie, and left me stranded, far from home. The road became an endless stone ribbon, the hills obstructions, the trees green blurs, the people simply moving figures with heads but no faces. 2 days later, we crossed the George Washington Bridge and I dropped the Spice Girls in New York City. After unloading their bags, I mumbled goodbye and left them standing on the sidewalk across from Grand Central Station. And God help me if I didn't find solace driving away in the words of a song. If you want my future, forget my past. If you want to get with me, better make it fast. Now don't go wasting my precious time. Get your act together. We could be just fine.